couple of hours ago, I have been listening to survivors of childhood abuse, all forms of abuse, pouring their hearts out and telling me how things that happened to them in their childhood has completely wrecked their lives in so many ways. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that charities like NAPAC don't need to exist at some point in the future. I know that's a bit of a pipe dream, but I think you all know what I'm saying. And I am again, I was spent a couple of hours this afternoon with a woman even older than me, and not quite as old as George, but older than me. And you know, she again was pouring out her heart about stuff that had happened to her more than 50 years ago, and how she still feels the pain today. And another reason that she came to see me was to talk about the fact that her own child, she recently discovered, her adult child, had been abused by this woman's husband, i.e., the daughter's stepdad. And again, this is something at NAPAC we hear every single day. So I haven't seen Resilience, and I don't know why I haven't seen it, because I probably should have done, and I want to see it because it sounds amazing. And as as much as I have little or no time to give to 70/30, I really wished I did have time, because you have my 100% support for what you are doing. But I want to find out more, because I want to be an ambassador, in the sense that in my capacity as NAPAC and in my capacity as a member of the Victims and Survivors panel at the Independent Inquiry, which is where I've spent most of the last couple of days, by the way, I want to be able to talk with some hope for the future. Because as I say, and I've said 1,000 times, we cannot undo the past. We cannot undo what went before us. But my God, we can make a difference in the future. That's why I'm so full of real, genuine, heartfelt admiration for everything that you are doing, because I love the sound of it. And if I'm invited, if I'm allowed, I would love to come along on the 27th of March and maybe meet a few of you and hopefully meet George. But I've already written that in my diary. And if I'm allowed, I would certainly love to come along and just show my face and see if there's a little bit more that I can perhaps do. Because one of the things that I kind of enjoy, and I do enjoy it in a little bit of a way, is I do get quite a bit of media attention from time to time. And I would love to talk about the hope that 70/30 brings. The other thing is I can talk for England. I can't talk for Scotland or Wales, but I certainly can talk for England. And sometimes people need to tell me to shut up. Otherwise, I will go on and on and on. Any questions? Oh, I haven't told you about NAPAC, but perhaps I should just mention we've been around for similar to the Wave Trust, in fact. I had the idea, the inspiration, whatever you want to call it, 22 years ago to set NAPAC up. And it wasn't long after that that I met you, George, which was amazing, because it was a long, long time ago now, how we've aged. And the reason I set NAPAC up was because I just couldn't find any help for me as a male survivor of childhood abuse. I was conscious that there were charities for all sorts of things. I mean, we've got nearly 200,000 charities in this country, and there was not a single national charity that supported adult survivors of childhood abuse. So I kind of set it up. We're still small. We're not cozy. We don't attract the funding easily. A lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about these issues, particularly around the issue of sexual abuse. But we are not just about sexual abuse. We support people that have suffered any kind of adverse experience in childhood, to use the ACE term. What we do, we have a brilliant bunch of volunteers who staff a free phone support line from Monday to Friday. They'll be taking calls as we sit here now. We run, when we've got the funds, we run support groups properly facilitated, safe, confidential, and very well planned support groups that have helped turn probably, I would say, hundreds of people's lives around now. But in terms of the support line, we've helped many thousands of people. So the helpline, the support groups are the two kind of key core things that we do. There's much more that we would like to do. We would like to provide one-to-one counselling of one kind or another, if and when we ever get the sort of funds and the resources to do that. But we're doing our little bit. We're chipping away at that wall. And as I say, I can talk for England, and it's probably time to just shut up and see if there's any questions. And thanks for listening.
Pete, thank you so much for coming on the call and for speaking to us all this evening. Guys, I just want to make you aware that I have muted everybody because there was quite a bit of background noise and I didn't want that disturbing Pete's talk. So if you do want to ask a question or make any comments, you'll probably find that we can't hear you until you unmute. Just a reminder for those of you on computer, you have your microphone icon at the top there. If it's orange, you are muted. If it's green, you can be heard. And if you're on a phone, it's *6 to mute and unmute.
If I could just start by saying that, Pete, you are indeed welcome on the 27th of March, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, George. I look forward to seeing you. Next question. I've got a question. Where did you get that photo of me? It's quite nice, actually, isn't it? I don't normally look that good.
I thought so. I thought it was very smiley and welcoming. Very casual.
Can I ask a question? Are you available for a question, Pete?
Yes, hello. Who's that?
Hello, Kevin here.
Hi, Kevin.
I'm just curious about the extent of the abuse that people tend to present with NAPAC, because I have a deep-seated concern that many people minimize and diminish the abuse that they experienced, saying, oh, it's not the level of physical or sexual abuse that they've heard about or read about, so somehow it can't have been that bad.
Yes.
And I wondered whether you felt that people did come and present to NAPAC for things like emotional neglect, which has had a profound effect on them.
Yes. Well, that's a very good question, Kevin. And first of all, I will plead guilty myself to having downplayed the things that happened to me as a child too often. And you're right. I think that is a common denominator amongst many survivors of abuse, is that they tend to, for various reasons, they tend to minimize what happened to them, particularly where they have become aware that there were more than one victim, often in families, or they blame themselves that because they weren't able to stop it or do something, they became aware that their siblings were then abused, or somebody else in the scout group, if it was an institution, and so on. What we always, I think, strive to do at NAPAC is to never encourage anybody to minimize the enormity, if you like, of what happened to them and the impact, and never to categorize one kind of abuse as being worse than another. I have heard people that have said, in fact, one guy rang me some time ago, maybe a year or two ago, he said, Pete, I had it far worse than you. And I was very polite, but I actually wanted to say, how the devil do you know that, sir? You know, because none of us know what others have gone through. And you're quite right, Kevin. Some people who have the most dreadful time psychologically can be every bit as hurting and damaged, even though they may have not suffered any physiological harm. You know, children who are neglected, children who are ignored, children who are belittled or humiliated. These can have the most profound consequences for the adult that they become. And another thing, just to finish with, is we again hear from people whose childhoods have been a catalogue of abuse, and they actually emerge reasonably resilient, sometimes even very resilient, despite everything that they've gone through. And there are other people who have been assaulted perhaps once, perhaps twice in their childhood, and they are far less resilient, if you like. They have suffered far more from that assault than somebody who apparently went through so much worse. That's why we know we can't sort of, we can't equate things with each other, because it doesn't work like that. We have to treat everybody individually, their experience, and how they coped with it and how they moved on in their life is going to be unique to that person. But we do get people, Kevin, who ring up and almost apologise, and I find that heartbreaking, because there's no need for that.
It's not, but sadly, as a society, I think we're all very, very good at judging. Yeah. And one of the things we judge is whether or not we think things have been bad enough to complain about. And I think certainly in Scotland there's a culture of, grow up, get over it, get on with it, suck it up. And I think that makes it very hard for people who have experienced abuse to come forward and reach out to organisations like yourselves for the support that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It's a societal problem, and society has to deal with, and that means all of us challenging that notion. And yes, Kevin, the number of times over the years that I've heard people quite flippantly say, "Well, you just get over it. You move on." And I say, "Excuse me, it isn't quite that easy for everybody." And I'm always very doubtful about people who judge others in that way.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter.
Hello.
Hi. Just wondered what the age you would consider an adult. Would it be adolescent? Would it be 16, 17, 18 years old? Is it boys, girls? Is there who to go to your support groups?
We as a charity, our remit is adults being 18 and over.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is woeful inadequacy for adolescents, for 16, 15, 16-year-olds. I'm just wondering, what would they do in the grey area?
Absolutely. And one of our patrons, who is Deirdre Sanders at The Sun, she's the problem page editor of The Sun, she gets thousands of letters every year from survivors, and she heartbreakingly gets a lot of correspondence from young people, just as you described, who completely fall through that hole of not being children, but not being adults. They are the adolescents, early teenagers, late teenagers, who apparently have nowhere to go, and that is a real tragedy. And we would need to change our way of working and increase our resources considerably if we were to try and our training, if we were to try and sort of bring that group under our sort of umbrella, as it were. It would completely change the fabric of our charity, because we would be treading on the toes of the child protection charities, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah, but my argument is, for the NHS, they consider an adult at 16 years old. But then if you go to a private setting, you're 18 years old. So again, they're falling through that area. So there's no specific age limit, is there?
No,
it depends on the service.
And the age of criminal responsibility, 10. What's that about?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. I wished I had the answers.
Thanks anyway, Peter. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Peter?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Mick. Greetings from Tunbridge in Kent.
Hello, Mick.
Hi. I'm interested in what you were saying about the one-to-one support, if funded. I wonder, do you have an intervention or a program that's ready to go but for the funding? And if so, who would deliver that? Would that be a practitioner type, or perhaps a peer or a volunteer?
No, we don't have anything in place. I mean, all we have at the moment in terms of practitioners are the people who, I mean, we have our volunteers who take calls on the line, many of whom have counselling qualifications and experience, but that's not an essential for that work. But our support team, our support groups are all facilitated by experienced, qualified facilitators stroke counsellors, and we've only got a handful of those. We would need many more if we were to provide one-to-one, but as I often say, and I've said it in the media many times, you know, we have a national health service that costs us God knows how many billions of pounds every year. Much of it is fantastic work, but much of it is wasted, and if only we could direct the services where they're needed into the therapeutic world, then I'm sure we could make a huge difference to the mental health of this country. But it needs a whole new kind of strategic rethink, doesn't it? I believe.
Yeah, I believe that too, and perhaps that's a basic tenet of the whole 70-30 campaign, to divert at least some, well, probably a tiny fraction of that money in the direction of projects like this that could actually do something about it.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
No, thank you, and I think that's why I love what George said about getting these APPGs and getting the MPs to actually do something rather than just sit round and nod and, you know, network and have a cup of tea and go away happy with themselves. We do really need people to make things happen, and Parliament is where it could be made to happen.
Yeah, there's a role for the community too, I guess, and you know, that's what you're finding, and many of the colleagues that are listening. There needs to be, alongside that that high level involvement, just the streets and houses, bringing forward people that are gonna help. That's a movement, isn't it?
Absolutely.
A project.
I love, which is why I admire what you're doing so much. I hadn't, you know, I've kind of lost touch with George over the last couple of years, and to see what's going on now, I am really heartened and thankful.
Yeah, great. I hear that. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Nick, if you could have your wish and get MPs to do, let's say, 3 things that actually, in your belief, would make a significant difference to the number of children suffering abuse, neglect, etc., what would you be asking them to do?
That's quite a powerful question, and having just spoken to my MP, I guess the first thing I would ask is for their endorsement, for their real active endorsement and acknowledgement. The second thing, and this is something that struck me when I had the conversation with my MP just a week or so ago, was that on his website he has a number of priorities, and they're such things as business and the high street, airplane noise, railway madness, that kind of thing. I'd love reduced. I'd love preventing ACEs to be a forthright priority of my MP.
Great. And Pete,
and to attend the APPGs and to take some of those actions forward themselves.
Yeah. Thank you. And Pete, what would your choices be?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm reminded of a quote by and forgive me if you've heard this before, by James Mercy, who is or was the director for disease control in the United States, who made a speech where he referred to a huge proportion of the child population suffering a disease that could spread, a disease that could actually infect and cause some of the people affected to replicate that disease and to infect others. He said if there was such a disease, governments would spend no end of resources on research, on looking at potential medicines, cures, etc., etc., if there were such a disease in our society. And then James said that, of course, we already have this disease. It's called childhood abuse. And I've been conscious, as you all have, over the last God knows how many months, of our obsession, understandably, our obsession with Brexit. And if only we could direct our obsession around an issue such as Brexit to protecting our children, then what a different world we would live in. I don't know how we get there, but I seriously think that 70-30 is making some inroads in that direction. And as again, I'm greatly heartened by that. But we need a whole change of culture around our schools, the way we treat our children, the way we regard our children. It needs a real sort of sea change, and I don't see that on the horizon, but I'm more hopeful perhaps now than I've ever been.
Thank you very much, Pete. Fascinating, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. Before I ask my question, I wonder if there's anybody else that's waiting to ask theirs. It doesn't appear so. So I'll go ahead, and if anybody is waiting to ask a question and is just struggling to unmute themselves, then please do come in. Pete, I wanted to, I've got two questions, and I'm conscious I don't want to hog the time. The point you made about people being less or more resilient, and therefore really how we perceive the level of abuse and severity of that abuse is not relevant, in the sense that actually it's more down to how the person then deals with that and the level of resiliency that they then have to overcome it. I know we talk a lot about resilience in our work, and a lot of our messaging is around that, and we certainly spend a lot of time talking about an always available adult and having that one person that you can go to in that situation where you need somebody to rely on and to trust. And I just wondered, with that point that you made, whether there was anything else that you put it down to when you speak to people who perhaps have shown more of a resilience.
Well, I think, again, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer. We are all very different in many ways. We're very similar in many ways, but we're all very different in many ways. And there does seem to be some common denominators between how people have dealt with different, should we call it, levels or duration of abuse. I visit and have for many years visit murderers in prison, and they're all people whose childhoods were blighted beyond imagination. As in, when I hear about them and I speak to them and I hear what happened to them, I start to think I got off lightly. And again, that's coming back to that trap of kind of thinking that perhaps it wasn't quite as bad. But I visit people who, as I say, have had a childhood of utter and total degradation that has resulted in them going completely off the rails, completely understandably, and they've ended up serving a life behind bars. And then there are people, and the common denominator there, in my experience, has been a complete absence of any kind of real affection or love. And I mean love. I think it's Sue Gerbhardt that wrote a book about why is love important, or words to that effect. And it's absolutely true. If there is the absence of love, then I think that the individual potentially is doomed. And that's very much down to society letting that person down, as well as their immediate family. There are other people who also had a pretty rough time in childhood, but may have experienced, either at times or continuously during the course of the abuse, and I would say I probably fall into that category, that although I always felt alone and I always felt kind of unhappy inside, I was always aware that there was love around me, and there was love around me, and so that kind of sustained me. And that's why I'm not in prison, and I didn't end up in a gutter with a needle hanging out of my arm or whatever. So I think there needs to be more research done. Well, maybe there doesn't, because the ACE reports seem to have uncovered most of it, don't they? But yeah, I mean, I'm just sorry, I'm really waffling on now, and maybe that's because I'm needing my dinner or something. But I don't know if any of that is making sense. But there does seem to be a common denominator between somebody that has suffered with a complete lack of love, and others that did at least enjoy some love. And the other thing that I recall is, and there are lots of different links between kinds of abuse and whether somebody goes on to perpetrate a crime. And there seems to be, for example, I was down at Surrey Police a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing a big investigation into abuse that took place at a boys' home in Surrey, and of the many former boys that went to this school who were abused, a significant number of them are in prison now, and the majority of them are in prison for, let's call them, sexual offences. And the majority of those boys who are in prison for sexual offences were boys who suffered very severe physical abuse at the homes that they attended, at the boys' home that they attended. So there is, and that reinforces what I had already heard, which is there's a strong link between physical abuse, severe physical abuse, and going on to kind of get your own back, if you like, by sexually abusing somebody that you can control, i.e. a child or a peer. Whereas with sexual abuse, the majority of people who suffer sexual abuse do not tend to go on to offend in that way. The majority, if they offend, are more likely to offend against themselves in terms of turning to drugs or other forms of self-harm. So it's a kind of complex issue, and once again, I'm conscious of kind of waffling on. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. That's really interesting, and I think that really just picks up on Mick's point earlier, where we've really got to think about the role of the community also when you think about who that person might be. Going back to your first point on having that person to kind of support you and to rely on and to confide in. You know, of course, that doesn't have to be a blood relative. So again, that really kind of emphasises the role for the community and for schools, etc.
Absolutely, yeah.
I also just wanted to pick up on your. Oh, sorry, I think somebody else wants to ask a question.
It was just an observation, Sarah. Again, Pete.
Hi.
In terms of your attempt at answering that question on resilience, one of the things that I mean, other people can correct me if they know better, but where children's earliest experiences set up their brain in that toxic stress cycle, they're primed to be less resilient, and many children who have grown up and ended up having to go into armed forces service, because of the priming they had when they were very, very young, or even in utero, they're highly susceptible to PTSD, or they're more susceptible to PTSD. So
Yes.
resilience starts off often before birth, I think.
Yes. No. I've heard that. I've read that. Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's one of the attractions for me with 70/30. It's that sense that it's, you know, it's that earliest experiences that lay the foundation and the template for the rest of your life. And yeah, the buffering of someone who loves you. And Sue Gerhardt's book was Love Matters. The buffering of somebody who really cares for you can make all the difference, but it doesn't guarantee it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, it's a horrible thing to sort of hear, but the younger you are abused, the worse it's going to be. That's the reality for all sorts of, as you say, neurological reasons, and the way the brain responds to, you know, I'm sure you've seen Nadine. Is it Nadine Burke Harris who explains it very, very well, about how the child's brain is just fuddled and messed with when abused very young, or as you say, extremely young. And we hear from people who can recall sort of well, they talk about pre-birth experiences or memories, which I don't disbelieve what I hear. I used to have my doubts, but not anymore.
Well, I think is it Jack Schoenfeld or Confeld that says that your brain might not remember, but your body remembers.
Yeah, indeed, and Bessel van der Kolk has written an excellent book. Yeah,
the body keeps the score. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, thank you very much. It's been mind-opening again.
No, the pleasure is mine. Believe me,
Pete,
I always learn something. Yes.
I'm conscious that we're running out of time, and I feel like this conversation could go on for far longer. I'm also conscious that what I'm about to say might open up a whole new discussion, and we probably don't have time for it. But I know that you spoke a little bit about your experience with the media, and that you're quite often kind of in front of the camera and speaking to the media about the work that you do with your organisation. That's something that we certainly look to do, and our ambassadors already do undertake certain activities with the media. We write blog posts and press releases and do a lot of social media activity. I just wondered very briefly if there was anything that you could say to the network around media engagement, and any tips or hints that you might have for how we better engage with the media.
Right. Well, very, very, very briefly, I have been doing it for a long time. I read the piece that you attached when you sent the notification from the local paper somewhere, which is really, really good. Local papers, they want a personal angle. If you can introduce a personal angle, that's what they tend to go for. But getting to local media is important and relatively easy. Getting into the national press is more of a challenge. But I personally have a lot of connections in the national press, and I'm more than happy to share those with you as and when.
Very brief, very succinct. Thank you very much, Pete, for that.
That's a very generous offer, Pete. Thank you. Really, really appreciate it. And like you, I've missed you for the last 2 or 3 years. It's wonderful to be back in contact with you again, and I'm sure NAPAC, Wave, and 70/30 together are going to make a real difference in the future.
I think they will, George. Well done.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Pete, once again. Guys, we are 1 minute away from the end of the call, so thank you everybody for coming on. We've had great attendance this evening. And Pete, thank you once again. We're very, very grateful for having you on the call this evening. Martha, just to share your message, that's just Martha in Glasgow, thanking you, Pete, for your talk and finding your talk really very interesting. So thank you again from everybody.
Thanks for having me, and I hope I meet all of you one day.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to say before we finish up for this evening?
Yes, I'm meeting the Glasgow group of ambassadors tomorrow. I'm catching a plane early tomorrow morning, and I'm really looking forward to meeting Martha and a couple of her colleagues in Sauchiehall Street tomorrow.
Looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah, we've got a fantastic group in Glasgow. So wonderful, George, that you're able to go and meet them.
Are you going to the Willow Tea Room? I'm very envious.
No, we're not going to the Willow Tea Rooms on this occasion. Anyway, great from George. Great to be on the call today and to have such fabulous ambassadors. I know quite a number of you individually have made some very valuable captures of MP support, and others are doing other work which is also extremely valuable. The organising of resilience, which we've had at least 3 people on this call who either have arranged or are arranging resilience showings. So lots of great things happening. Keep it up, guys. We are really making a difference now, and every one of you is playing a part. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night and thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.